Before I introduce today's guest, I want to tell you about our one and only sponsor or advertiser. It's the Great Courses Plus. It's an app on your phone. Looks like this. For those of you watching, you just touch the app. It opens it up. And the access to hundreds of courses and therefore thousands of lectures is available for a monthly fee. If you subscribe through my podcast, that is, you go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon, you get a free trial. And therefore you have free access to hundreds of courses and therefore thousands of lectures. Just to give you an idea, instead of focusing on one particular course that I've been listening to, just to give you a little bit of a sampling, great ideas of psychology, philosophy and physics, the dark side of human nature, the pagan world, the Pacific Theater in World War II, white-collar criminal law, U.S. government, mind-blowing science, this day in history, September, recording this in September 2020, Apollo 11, everyday guide to beer, everyday guide to beer, Battlefield Europe, infectious diseases, a field guide to the planets, the science of extreme weather, what we know about the Big Bang, and on and on and on. Literally, just hundreds. You just scroll through. And the beauty about this app, thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon, is that instead of purchasing a single course and then feeling like you need to listen to all the lectures, maybe you don't want to listen to all the lectures. Maybe you just want to do a sampling, which is pretty much what I usually do. So give it a try. It's, again, you go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/salon. Thanks for listening. My guest today is Marta Zaraska. Her new book is Growing Young: How Friendship, Optimism, and Kindness Can Help You Live to 100. Marta is a Canadian-Polish science journalist, now living in France. She's written about nutrition and psychology for the Washington Post, Scientific American, The Atlantic, the Los Angeles Times, and New Scientist, among others. She's the author of Meat Hooked: The History and Science of Our 2.5 Million Year Obsession with Meat, which I also read. We discussed the meat book just toward the end because I have my usual question for authors like this that, is it okay if I eat meat or not? And she's pretty critical of the studies that show meat is okay or healthy, mainly because she says they're primarily all funded by the meat industry. Anyway, but the main focus is the Growing Young book. The most interesting take-home of this is that the much larger effects than diet and exercise for longevity and health is social aspects. That is, having relationships, friendships, a community, some kind of purpose, meaningfulness in life, something to get you out of yourself, that you're not just focused on yourself. Certainly the reduction of loneliness and stress, particularly in social life stress. All those seem to have a much larger effect on longevity and health than the traditional things we think about of diet and nutrition and supplements and things like that. So that's the primary focus of the conversation. Super interesting talk on this because obviously we all care about wanting to live long, healthy lives. And so I think, her bringing us up to date on what the latest research is on this. We also talked about the replication crisis in science and why so many of the studies in this particular area are not replicable, or they're really bad, or they have huge error bars in their conclusions that mean the conclusions are largely meaningless. We also address that issue. So with that, I give you Marta Zaraska. Give you a proper introduction. You are the author of the new book called Growing Young: How Friendship, Optimism, and Kindness Can Help You Live to 100. I'm the perfect reader for this book because I just turned 66 on Tuesday, and I went out for a 66-mile bike ride just to ride my age.
Wow.
And
that's impressive.
And so I do think about these things because my biological father died when he was 61. So I kind of feel like I've been on borrowed time for some weird idea for the last 5 years. But on the other hand, he was a lifelong alcoholic, and he wasn't an athlete. I've been an athlete my whole life, but also after reading your book, I realized, well, he was in a really crappy marriage. He was very unhappy, and probably part of the reason he started drinking in the first place. And to my stepmom, although I love my stepmom, but marriages go bad. And so now after reading your book, I'm thinking maybe it wasn't just the alcohol and the lack of exercise and a crappy diet probably, that goes with that, but also no love in the home. And, friendships and community and all that stuff really makes a difference. So let's start there. I'm going to read the opening passage because I want you to talk a little bit about your personal self, how you came to write this book. When I was a child, besides teaching me how to ride a bike and how to mow the lawn without cutting through the electrical cord, my father taught me the importance of diet and exercise for health and longevity. He instilled in me the importance of eating 5 veggies a day, and steamed broccoli in particular, the vital role of healthy unsaturated fats, and the power of phytonutrients found in dark chocolate and red wine. He insisted I play tennis, took me cross-country skiing, and inspired me with his exercise routine, an hour each day, rain or shine. Like any parent, he wants to see me, his child, live to 100. And now that I'm a parent, too, I find myself with a similar wish. I want my daughter to one day become a centenarian. What's more, I want to live long enough myself to see her blow out 80 candles on her birthday cake. That would be impressive. I mashed organic peas, pureed heritage tomatoes, and froze nutritionist soups. In the meantime, I forced myself to eat goji berries and drink kale juice. I encouraged my husband to try fasting and nagged him to go to the gym. I ran a half marathon. I suffered through thousands of sit-ups. That's such a great way to start, because that is kind of the routine we think we have to do to get there, right? So give us a little bit of background. Where are you from? I detect a strong accent there, and how you got into all this.
I mean, it's complicated. I was born in Poland. That's maybe the accent you're detecting. So I was born in Poland. I grew up in Poland. And then I moved to Canada. So I'm also Canadian. And I lived in 6 countries so far. I think I'm done with moving to different countries. So probably that's going to be it. I'm in France right now. And probably, as I said, staying here. So yeah, that's my short, at least, background on my nationality. Whereas generally I'm a science journalist. I write for Scientific American, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, the New Discover, New Scientist Discover magazine, all this kind of outlets. And I've been into nutrition and exercise for a very long time. As you read yourself in my book, it was my dad who really taught me how extremely important it is to take care of yourself. And he did a lot of nagging as well. And so I was very much into it, and also writing about it at the same time. I wrote plenty of articles on how to eat healthily, how to exercise, what not to eat, and so on and so on. So I really had a lot of background and research papers that I've read on the topic. And at the same time, I started coming across more and more research that was pointing in a very different direction. So it was showing that I might not have been doing the best things I should be doing. So particularly, there was one meta-analysis I stumbled one day upon, and it very conveniently put all the numbers beside each other. So there was, for example, how much smoking matters, or how much diet matters, how much exercise matters, but also things like social inclusion. So having lots of friends and neighbors, very strong community, living with someone, being married, happily married, having friends. And these numbers were shocking to me, because they showed that apart from smoking, the most important thing you could do for your longevity was a happy marriage, and not exercise or diet. So, for example, for happy marriage, the number, how much it can lower your mortality risk, it's about 49%. Whereas for diet or exercise, it generally hovers around 20 to 30%. So, this is a very big difference. And for this whole kind of social integration number, so having happy romantic relationship and friends and community, all this together can lower your mortality risk around 60%. So this is enormous, 60 versus 20 to 30. So really, I was really missing some very important thing here, and just, as you said, mashing all these heritage tomatoes instead of thinking about purpose in life and friendship and working on my marriage as well.
Yeah. What do those numbers mean exactly? Lowering your mortality rate 20% or 40%? How is that calculated?
I mean, okay. So if we were to really go into the details here, it would be very, very complicated. But in general, it means that when researchers take a group of people, it generally comes from epidemiological studies. So they look, let's say, at 10,000 people, right? And they look who will die, for example, within the study period. So they will observe the people for more like track their lives for, let's say, 10 years or 20 years, sometimes even. And they see how many of them die, right? And then they can see what was the risk of you dying within this period of time compared to your peers, so other people your age. For example, how many 60-year-olds who were married died within the period of 10 years and how many were still alive. And this way they calculate how much it can lower your risk of dying within this particular period of time. So it's very difficult to, it's not completely appropriate to say that it will prolong your life by this amount of time or anything. It's within the study period, but this gives you ideas about how it compares to other health measures we do, right? It's as I also write in Growing Young, you cannot exactly compare the numbers as dogma, right? It's not exactly, if they all came from the same study, the same population, the same study period, same methodology exactly, then you could say, yes, it's exactly that. But they come from very different studies. But it gives you an idea of what matters, right? If the difference is as big as 20% versus 60%, it gives you at least a thought that maybe it's something that's really, really important here.
Yeah, we mentioned Judea Pearl's book, The Book of Why. He's got a chapter in there on the difficulties of determining causality in this realm of how, epidemiological studies, how important they are, but how difficult it is because there's so many factors to control for intervening variables to determine what the causal vector really is. So even smoking, that was a much harder problem to solve than I would have imagined, because we all accept it today as obvious and a given that it causes lung cancer. But, in the 50s and 60s, it wasn't obvious. And that's a simple one compared to, say, eating meat versus veggies, or having a relationship and eating meat and eating veggies, or working out, having a good marriage and eating veggies and, and whatever. You start adding those factors and it really gets messy.
I mean, it certainly does, although supposedly one part of why married people live longer is exactly because they do eat healthier. It's just part of it, but it is an important part as well. So I call it the nag factor. So basically your husband or your wife telling you, to eat healthier, to take more care of yourself. And it works as well. The same with friendships. Your friends can be telling you to eat better. They can also be sharing bad habits with you. But in general, studies show that you come out better. And marriage in particular is very good in this kind of making sure you take your medication on time, for example, as well, right? So somebody checking on you. But this is just part of it. So even when you control for this nag factor, the effects of marriage still exist. And we can really see that these are due to very physiological effects and physiological processes as well.
Does that also explain the effect of religion on longevity and health? Of course, as my theist friends are eager to point out to me, look, we live longer and we're happier people because we believe in God. It's like, wait a minute, what's actually going on here? When you dig into the studies, you see, well, they're more likely to be married, they're less likely to smoke and have risky behaviors. They're more likely to have big families and these communities. The stuff that you talk about in your book that has this pragmatic effect. Somebody that nags you, don't eat the cheesecake, or don't forget to take your vitamins, or whatever. The nag factor.
I mean, yes, and also the part of it is also perhaps for people who are religious, maybe purpose in life as well. So it can be giving them this thing, and also lots of them volunteer as well. So, but absolutely does not mean you have to be religious. You can get those same benefits from other, secular volunteering. Can volunteer outside of the church exactly the same way and get exactly the same benefits. You can also get the purpose in life without God as well, right? So definitely there can be some benefits found there, but it can be found exactly outside the church in the very same way.
Well, before we dive into all those different factors, let's talk about your first chapter where you talk about why we have to die in the first place. I mean, I have a 4-year-old and when he gets cut or whatever, I can practically watch it heal. It's so fast. And when I get cut, it takes, days or weeks to heal. And it's like, why can't my body be like his body?
I mean, we certainly age, but the question why we age is a question we don't know the answer yet. And if you take a group of scientists who are studying aging, let's say you take 40 of them, there is a great likelihood, and put them in the same room, there is a great likelihood that a fight will start because they all have different ideas and different theories why we age in the first place, or even how long can humans live. So there was this one paper recently that argued that humans can only live to about 115. That's the kind of natural lifespan. And then there was so many letters to editor, there and back between all the scientists who are fighting over this number, whether there is a limit, there is no limit. So really, we still know very, very little about why we age, how much can we age, how much we have to age. Do we have to age? It's really, really complicated. Definitely, we know that there is a huge difference between the body of a 66-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so when I was writing Growing Young, I visited one lab in Oxford where I was lucky to see, for example, how cells age, so how differently they look like, right? So for example, age cells are this really fat and you could say bloated with all this junk that they accumulate over the years, because when they basically suck in all the broken parts, right? So aging is messy. It's nothing neat. Like sometimes we think that biology is all, everything makes sense, everything works the way it should, but it's not. There are mistakes are being made all the time in our bodies. The broken parts are left behind, and this is all aging, right? So in general, one of the theories why we age states that we age because after we reproduce, basically nature stops caring for us. We are useless. We've already passed on our genes, and now all the mechanisms that made sure that we were good up until then are no longer necessary. So it all basically breaks down. But whether we can stop it, we can reverse it, these are still questions that scientists really are struggling with.
Well, there's kind of an evolutionary logic to you not being needed in the population or gene pool after a certain number of decades, once you've passed your peak reproductive age, and then maybe say grandparenthood as a social support for your genetic offspring's second generation. So by the time you're, say, 70 or 80, in terms of what natural selection cares about, to the extent that it does, not in a conscious way, but just how it operates, there's kind of a logic to there's no reason for you to live 900 years or whatever, because you've already done your job from an evolutionary perspective.
Unfortunately, that's the way it is. And even though, we had this oldest woman ever who lived to be 122, I describe her in Growing Young as well. She was such an outlier that even when scientists started studying her, she basically messed up a study on supercentenarians that was being run in France, because this one scientist I talked here with and his colleagues, they were running a study on people who were over 110 years old, and they were trying to understand why they live so long, and if they are exceptional in any way. And then they stumbled upon this woman, Jean Calment, and she messed up their data because she was such an outlier. They didn't know what to do with her. But other than that, in general, the record for longevity in most countries hovers somewhere around this 115. Whether we'll be able to break it, but whether most of us will be able to break it in, let's say, in a century or two, I don't know. Nobody knows.
Well, but 115 to 122, that's not that much. It's not like she made it to 150 or 200. So I don't see that really as a violation here. Here's the analogy I'll use. I'll use your previous book, Meat Hooked, which I also read and loved. So this is like the upper ceiling. So I think of the lifespan as this sort of asymptotic curve that approaches the ceiling of our upper, whatever it is, 115, 120. And the point of everything in your book is to try to get closer to there. Let's assume we can't break through the barrier, but to get as close as you can at a high quality life before the whole thing melts down. That's kind of the point, right?
Yeah, this is a question I'm often actually asked, or even people tell me, okay, the title of your book says How to Live to 100, but guess what? I don't want to live to 100. But the thing is, it's actually a common misconception. So, of course, just like everybody knows a granny who smoked her whole life and lived to be 100, there are exceptions. So people who live to be very, very old and suffer bad health for like half a century. But that's not a usual pattern. So what actually comes out in research is that when the people who live to be very old, even the super centenarians, so those over 110 years old, they actually end up being sick for much shorter periods of time. So, for example, people, again, those super centenarians, so people who live to be 110, 1 in 10 of them will escape disease until the very last 3 months of life. So they will be basically in perfect health until, let's say, 112, and then 3 months and they die. So, which is really amazing when you think about it. And people who die at the average Western age of 80 something, in general, they spend about 18% of their years in bad health at the very end. Whereas, people who live to be centenarians and super centenarians, they spend much, much less time being actually infirm. So striving to live longer doesn't mean that you are likely to be infirm for a very long time. Actually, it's the opposite is true.
Yeah, obviously having a goal to make it to 100 where you spend the last 20 years in a nursing home bedridden, that's not what we're talking about. No one wants that. There's also kind of a myth I find that when I talk to people about like cryonics or mind uploading or whatever, but just the transhumanists and their desire to live long, a lot of the pushback they get is from people say it's just not natural. We should not live beyond 100. It's like, all right, you first. Okay, so let's say tomorrow is your day. Would you like another month? If you're healthy and happy, whatever, yeah, of course I'll take another month. Okay, then a month goes by. Okay, tomorrow's your day. Wait. I'd like 6 more months. Okay, and you just carry that out. Of course, everybody's going to want to live as long as they possibly can, assuming they're not super depressed or infirm. And so I find that a myth. Although, to be fair, I also find the kind of Ray Kurzweils and Aubrey de Greys of the world a bit delusional, that somehow, slamming down mega vitamins and minerals. And in Aubrey's case, he wants to reprogram the cells. As you know, he's got his little 7 different things you have to do to clean out the cells and all that. I just think we're nowhere near accomplishing anything like that. Is that your sense as well?
I mean, I have a whole chapter on all the supplements and pills we are popping, so I'm definitely against that, and that's is vast majority of scientists out there. And there are lots of things you can pop these days, and Ray Kurzweil famously pops over 90 pills a day in his struggle to stay young and stop aging. And lots of people, there's metformin, for example, is making rounds around, especially in California these days, and these are generally very dangerous ideas, because the idea that you can just pop one pill and it will reverse aging or stop aging it's crazy when you think about it. We don't even understand why we age or how we age, and then you think that just one pill will stop it. If we don't know what's happening, that's basically impossible. And the side effects, which we generally don't even know what they are, can be really dangerous. And with metformin, for example, we are starting to realize that there are side effects. They can be very dangerous. And so just popping things and especially mixing things, because, if you're taking several different supplements or drugs, they all interact with each other. These are chemicals, right? So it's nothing, just they don't stay in separate little compartments of your stomach. Everything is mixing. And when you pop 91 pills, nobody knows what's happening inside your body with that. So that's a very dangerous idea.
And yet when you talk to them, they have studies. They go, there was this study done, published in this journal or whatever, that showed some effect. Here maybe we're bumping up against the replication crisis or, the file drawer effect, where they ran 10 studies and only one came out after you massaged the data and did some p-hacking. So I'm sure you must have run into a lot of those kind of crappy studies.
I mean, first of all, the question, there are so many journals out there, as you know it, and some of them are like, Eastern Polish Journal of Nutrition and Technology or whatever. They're like, really, you've never heard about them before. And basically they pay you to publish there. There actually are lots of journals like this that, if you pay, they will publish. So you don't want to read those studies. You just avoid them, right? So first of all, you have to go for the top journals. And then, even then, it's, you never know, the studies get retracted. You have to also, one big thing I'm really into is study sponsoring. So who paid for the study, right? And especially we talked about meat and obviously a lot of research there is sponsored, but in other areas as well, so where the money is coming from, where it has been published, who published it, exactly, has it been replicated? So of course, if you have a meta-analysis, that's the best, especially one published in a really leading journal. But at some point you have to trust something as well. So when I also hear people saying, there is always some other study, at some point you have to trust the process and the scientific process, and that the editors of the leading journals are doing their good job to weed out the bad research. And that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. So there's so many fads in this area, and the public sees these things come and go. Coffee's good, coffee's bad, eggs are bad, eggs are good. This is the part of that replication crisis problem. And then people just don't.
And sponsored studies as well.
Sponsored studies. That's right. Yeah. And so people they just throw it all out and don't trust anything, or they just pick the one they want. Remember the red wine thing? What was the chemical in there? I forget what it was called. Resveratrol, or
there is generally tannin, probably. Yeah. It's the phytonutrients and tannins, right? Yeah. So that's or resveratrol maybe as well. Yeah. I don't know which one you're talking about. So there are lots of different things in wine.
But it would have been the equivalent of drinking like 10 bottles of red wine a day or something like that to get the effect. So then all these companies came out with, well, here's the pill. This pill is the equivalent of 10 bottles of red wine. It's like, ugh.
First of all, part of the fault, I always say, also lies with us science journalists and the way the media functions these days. Because, for example, I often say that if I wanted today to sell an article saying, eat more vegetables, you will live longer, guess what will happen? Nobody will publish it. It's too boring. We've heard that, right? So, but if you publish a story, for example, there is a bean in Africa that nobody ever heard before about, but it will give you more vitamin B6 and make you live longer, whatever. Then suddenly it makes headlines because it's new. Nobody heard about it before. So that's unfortunately how media works these days, especially, with our attention problem and social media and everything. You really need to grab attention, and you grab attention with new things, surprising things. This is also why all those studies, for example, showing that sugar, there I even saw one time a study showing that sugar is good for children. And it was all over the media, of course, because why? Because it was something completely different than what you're used to. Of course, it was a tiny sample, bad journal. It didn't matter at all. It was attention grabbing, and this is also why people get discouraged with science, because they think, yesterday I saw a study article saying sugar is bad for me. Today I'm seeing an article saying sugar is good for me. So I think it all equals itself out. But the truth is, of course, there is thousands of studies showing, maybe hundreds of studies showing sugar is bad for you, and just one little one saying it's good for you. So.
Yeah, just as a kind of guideline for how science works, it's probably best to wait for the meta-analysis or 100 studies rather than one before you draw conclusions. Especially in a complex system like the human body, there's so many factors going on at the same time, all interacting. And particularly with aging, there's so many things that happen at the same time. It's impossible that one factor could play any kind of massive role like that to, push aging, break through the barrier and live 200 years, or, Aubrey de Grey's, the first person to live 1,000 years is alive today. It's like, it reminds me of being in church, like the promise of immortality. These guys, to me, when I first, I met Ray Kurzweil at the Singularity Summit in New York City, and lots of interesting talks. These guys, they all love science and technology, as do I. So it's fun. But, when Ray spoke, it was almost like a Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream, one day soon we're going to live forever. And it's like, wow. And you could kind of sense the energy in the room, like, yes, I get to live, and we're the ones. And I'm thinking, my God, I'm back in church again.
Yeah. Yeah, and you always need some keywords like telomeres, for example, and you throw telomeres out there, and everybody, also thinks it's that's the way to go. And then a simple solution like the telomere, lengthening pill, and you have a recipe, right?
Yeah, my friend Deepak Chopra claims that meditation lengthens your telomeres. Not sure how that would happen. Maybe it reduces stress, and there's some multiple effects there, or whatever. But yeah, since we're on that, what's the latest on telomeres and its relationship to longevity, and what if anything you can do about it?
Yeah, I have an article coming up in New Scientist any day now, exactly on the myth of telomeres. So in general, telomeres are a very good research tool. So, for actual scientists, when they try to compare populations and study aging also and understand how aging happens. But the way telomeres are being sold in popular media is completely messed up. Basically, you cannot order yourself a telomere test and figure out that, you're 66, you order yourself a test and it comes back and tells you that based on your telomere length, you are actually 50 or 75. This is a complete myth. It just doesn't work this way. It's far more complicated. We don't really understand telomeres very well. We don't even know it's even possible that telomere length may be actually affecting our behavior. So it may be going, both sides. So whatever you do affects your telomeres, but your telomeres may be affecting you as well. And also the different methods the different labs are using, the error rates are so large that, for example, if you today order this test and it tells you that you're actually 50 years old instead of 66, if you order it tomorrow, it can come back and tell you you're 70. So, and basing, your lifestyle, your choices on that, it's completely wrong. And all those pills, the telomere prolonging pills, they can be just dangerous because we know, for example, that on one hand, having longer telomeres has been linked to good cardiovascular health, but having long telomeres has also been linked to cancer risk. So that if you have very long telomeres, you may be more prone to cancer. So prolonging your telomeres could potentially be a recipe for cancer. So you may be just trading one thing for another. It's much more complicated than, again, people like simplistic, right? There's also what I write in Growing Young, that this is why we love pills. This is why we love exercise as well, because you can measure how many steps you took today. You can measure how many push-ups you've done. You can weight your broccoli. I ate 100 grams today, I'm fine. But with kindness, optimism, friendship, it's much more hard to measure. So people are scared of it, because we need the simplicity. Yeah. We crave the simplicity. And unfortunately, aging, our bodies are just not simple.
Yeah, you can't go to the health section of Whole Foods and find a spouse or a lover or a good friend or a best friend or a family.
I mean, you could.
Well, maybe people do meet in that. Actually,
you could meet, I guess.
Yeah, because I do have a sense when I go to Whole Foods here that it's almost like a spiritual experience for a lot of people. Because the smells, because they have and all the extra prices, the higher prices. I feel like I'm buying higher quality food to help me live longer, or whatever. Back to the telomeres, just for people that don't know, these are the tips of chromosomes. And there's this idea of the Hayflick limit that cells can only divide so many times and then they die. And extending the telomeres means the cells can divide longer, so you live longer. This is the simplistic idea of it, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah. So that's obviously, it's far more complicated. Basically, this is the take home message. And just looking also at the studies, also when I was talking to scientists who study telomeres, they're really the top experts out there. And what they told me is that unfortunately telomeres were the victim of their own success. So basically nowadays also scientists from very different fields of study who have nothing to do with biology or aging love to use telomeres to measure stuff. You can be in economics, you can be, in marketing, and everybody uses telomeres. And they usually also employ this most simple method of measuring the length of telomeres, which is very prone to errors. And so the differences between labs are very, very high. So unfortunately, there's a lot of poor quality studies out there using telomeres. And so it's much more easy to find some bad research in telomeres than maybe in some other areas.
Yeah, for people not familiar with it, when you see these studies with data, and then they have an error bar measurement, and usually you'll see like a curve, and then you'll see a little vertical line with a couple little hashtag or bars over it. So you might have like it's 50 plus or minus 20. Well, wait a minute. So it's somewhere between 30 and 70. I mean, what? It's just almost useless as a figure when the error bars are so wide.
Yep. Yeah, and even if with telomeres, it even matters which lab you used, because there was one actual paper study that compared different labs that were measuring telomere lengths, and they concluded that the differences between labs are so large that it makes all the research on small samples especially absolutely worthless. So if you have a study on 100 people doing meditation and then you check their telomeres, this is just not good research.
Yeah, I had Stuart Ritchie on the podcast a few weeks ago. He has a new book out, Science Fictions, about the replication crisis and how bad most of these studies are in the social sciences and medical sciences. Usually complex subjects reduced to super simple factors that never replicate, or if they do, that barely, and then you find out a file drawer problem, and the person ran 9 experiments and only reported the one, and so on. And it's like there are just so many of these studies that are so famous that probably aren't true. And it's one thing for it to be kind of cutesy, like the power pose. That if you stand up straight with your shoulders back, you'll increase your testosterone.
Okay,
right, there you go. Straighten up. And then your testosterone will go up, and then you lean in and ask for the raise, and you'll be a more power broker in business or something like that. And I remember when Amy Cuddy gave that talk at TED, and afterwards, everybody was sort of walking around with their shoulders out like, oh, yeah, I have a power pose here. Well, then Stuart says, that those were never replicated. And there's a bunch like that. And so it's one thing, power pose is kind of cute, whatever. But we're talking about what you're writing about. This is serious. We're talking about health and longevity and so on.
And there are hundreds and hundreds of studies, replicated studies on that, and meta-analysis and studies in really good journals. So this is, I was actually surprised myself when I stumbled upon this field of research that somehow it escaped our attention, even though it's been going on for at least 60 years. Because, for example, the first studies showing that volunteering is really good for our health started in the 50s. So it's nothing really new, and yet somehow it didn't make it it didn't grab our public attention. So that was really fascinating for me.
Now, let's think about exercise and diet in a slightly different way. Maybe it's that it's not the magic bullet to live longer. It's to prevent you from dying earlier. It's sort of a more of a, to get you up there to the upper ceiling. It doesn't get you there. It just prevents you from not getting there earlier. Something like that.
I mean, definitely generally it's about disease prevention, right? So when I'm talking about the soft drivers of health, so kindness and friendship and personality as well, optimism, all these things are very similar in a way to exercise and diet, because they are about preventing you developing diseases. So, for example, preventing your arteries getting clogged, or changing your gene expression in terms of cancer, for example. So you are much less likely to actually get cancer, and so on, and so on. So this is all about prevention, and keeping your body in a good shape. So your blood sugar fine, and your cholesterol low, and your cortisol in healthy balance, and so on and so on, so that you will not develop certain conditions and then you won't die.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second. Just since I have you, what's the latest on cholesterol? Should people be taking statins to keep your cholesterol low? Does that matter for heart disease?
I'm not a doctor, so I don't feel competent to be talking statins here. I can tell you, about how your marriage or your friendship can influence your cardiovascular health, but don't ask me about statins.
Okay. All right. Well, let's talk about that then. What is the causal mechanism to, say, being married or having a family or being loved or volunteering? How does that translate into physiological changes that get you to live longer?
So when you think about marriage in particular, let's say romantic relationship. So when people are in a committed relationship with another person, and for a prolonged period of time, their bodies basically synchronize. So you synchronize things like electrical activity in your chest, for example. You synchronize your temperature, your cortisol levels. So really a lot of physiological changes are happening to your body when you're living with another person. And we've already talked about the nag factor. So we are already not, moving to the biological side of it. But basically it all boils down to the feeling of safety and comfort and basically relaxation, you could say, that you get from the knowledge that there is someone out there for you who cares about you, who will help you if you need. And we are a social species, just like our cousins, the chimps. We thrive when we are surrounded by others. We are not loners. We, humans as a species, we are made to live in a tribe. And we evolved several different mechanisms that function the best when we are surrounded by others. So on one hand, you have social hormones, so the oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, vasopressin, that on one hand influence our emotions, but on the other hand, also influence our physiology directly. So for example, the oxytocin, which is often called the love hormone, even though, again, it's more complicated than that. But oxytocin can make you get this kind of warm, fuzzy feelings when you are with your loved ones on one hand, make you feel more connected. But on the other hand, it has very physiological effects on your body. For example, it lowers inflammation levels. It helps bone growth, which potentially can prevent osteoporosis, for example. Serotonin, again, often called the feel-good hormone, simplification, but it is also involved in our relationships and how we feel about other people, how we connect with others. But also it can, for example, help, at least in mice, regenerate liver. It affects your vascular health. So there are lots of processes that are happening, endorphins, natural painkillers that make you trust other people. So those hormones are working both ways between our social connection, our feelings of inclusion, and also directly affecting our health. So that's one part of it. Then there is, for example, your fight and flight response. So your the HPA axis, so-called. So which in the brain, your hypothalamus and your amygdala, all these processes start cascading lots of hormones. Cortisol, adrenaline, getting in the end. Getting into your body, but lots of other hormones as well. Basically, when we are with other people, this kind of systems, this fight and flight response is much calmer. We don't go into this stressed overdrive. Whereas when we are alone, we experience stress, and it makes perfect sense because if you were in evolutionary past on a savanna, and if you were alone, you were in trouble. So you had a very good reason to, be in this stressed overdrive because we're much more likely to get hurt and die. And whereas when you are with your tribe, you felt secure. And this is the same thing that's still happening to us and still functioning in the very same way. And of course, there are also the gut microbes, which are very famous these days, but they really do work here as well. So connecting our thoughts and feelings with our health, also because we exchange microbes with people around us. So when you touch other people, when you hug other people, you actually exchange your gut microbiome with them.
There's a little bit of both accentuating the positive and attenuating the negative. It's less stressful to be in a group, a relationship, a community, friends and family. But it's also positive. I mean, it generates positive hormones like oxytocin. My friend Paul Zak was one of the early researchers in this, where he would have people play the ultimatum game where they would exchange and give each other money or whatever, or have people give hugs and stuff like that. And there was an increase in oxytocin. Or if you give them oxytocin, he would give them the chemical that they give pregnant women to, the spray.
Yeah.
And then he got kind of hammered for oversimplifying some of his studies, like people were imagining, spraying a used car sales office with oxytocin, then people would be much happier and buy more cars or whatever. And of course, that's way too simple. And then he became known as the love doctor, and he just likes to hug everybody, because if hugging gives you a little boost of oxytocin and makes people feel better, reduces stress, and so on, then we should all be hugging. Well, maybe that's not such a good idea in COVID-19 now, but but again, that's kind of what you're talking about. Although we have to be careful not to oversimplify those findings.
I mean, definitely hugging is good for you, but it's part of the kind of grooming, like other apes, social apes, again, chimpanzees, they groom each other and it calms them down. It creates bonds and also relaxes them. And for us, the grooming is hugging, holding hands, looking also into each other's eyes. And a very similar biological processes are happening when we are doing that. Also in chimpanzees, you can see the release of endorphins, for example, from grooming. And we also get those social hormones when we are grooming. For us, it can be hugging. It can be also, for example, singing together or dancing together, which, for example, Professor Robin Dunbar at Oxford considers a modern type of grooming that gives us this extra boost of social hormones. So there is definitely, we are very much still. Our bodies are very much still living on a savanna.
Yeah.
And a lot of things that are malfunctioning today are because we are not very well suited to working from home alone, for example, and only seeing other people on computer screens. So our bodies just don't function the best when that happens to us.
Yeah, it's not the same. Zoom, or here we are, Skype, is not the same as being in person. I do worry about perhaps the handshake and the hug will be gone, may never come back after COVID-19.
I mean, I'll have to disagree with you here because, when you hear about, for example, the Spanish flu, right? They actually had a lot of very similar measures back then. They were wearing masks. They were also told not to hug, not to shake hands, and people stopped doing that as well in 1918 and 1919. But guess what? We were hugging and shaking hands for. Exactly. So it came back. So maybe they also were worried that what if we stop but we didn't. And I'm pretty sure it's too strong a need in us to have this body contact, to touch other people, to be close. I really don't think we will lose that.
I hope you're right. Yeah, that's right. So let's talk about loneliness. There's allegedly now a crisis of loneliness and suicide and so on. I'm not sure I agree that those numbers really indicate that. But certainly there are people that have that issue, and why, for example, solitary confinement is now considered torture, and so why that would be, and what is the effect of loneliness on our bodies?
I mean, so loneliness is definitely a huge health wrecker. So then lots of things are happening. Once again, for example, the telomeres, we've talked about them. So research shows that people who are lonely have shorter telomeres, and not only people, actually. For example, parrots also have shorter telomeres if you house them alone, and other animals as well. There is also different gene expression, for example, in terms of inflammation and cancer as well happening when you're lonely. You have worse antiviral response. For example, there are some fascinating studies when the scientists invited into a lab a group of people, they measured how lonely they felt, and then they basically infected them with cold viruses, rhinoviruses in that particular case. The people were paid a lot of money for this research to encourage them, to have an actual virus stuck up their nose. And afterwards, the researchers measured the symptoms and the viral load, and checking who got sicker and who didn't get sick, who didn't develop symptoms, and so on and so on. And they showed that those who were the most lonely also were the most likely to develop the most symptoms and the heaviest sickness after being infected with exactly the same dose of the virus. So there is definitely something going on. And there are also other studies showing a different gene expression in terms of viral response in people who are lonely. So which, of course, makes you think about what we are doing right now, staying isolated in times of coronavirus, which of course is necessary. I'm absolutely not saying don't isolate. Here in France, we've been closed for 56 days when we had to have a permission to exit our houses. So we have to do that. But yeah, that there are consequences, and we don't function well when we are lonely. And the British recognize it to the point that they have even appointed in 2018 a minister for loneliness, because they know it's as important, if not more, as healthy eating and exercise.
Are there cultural differences or national differences in how close or far apart, or tight and loose cultures, as Michelle Gelfand calls them, in terms of these kinds of health effects? How much touching is encouraged culturally or not?
I mean, definitely there are cultural differences, but in one way or the other, people stay close, right? You don't have any culture out there where everybody just lives alone
Right,
and
right.
never sees other people, never touches. Everybody some cultures hug, some cultures do the bees like the French. Other cultures like the Japanese, maybe they don't hug, they don't do the bees, but they are very very engaged with other people as well in other ways. So there is always connection, one way or the other. Yes, there are differences, and also there are differences in loneliness levels between the societies. But again, there are no societies out there of pure loners.
Yeah. And let's talk about stress and some of the stressors that cause these health systems to break down, anxiety, whatever, grief, whatnot, and then what we can do about it.
So stress in general, we are talking about this, HPA axis, so the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is a mouthful again for the cascade of things that happen when you start getting anxious, right? So the same when you saw a lion on the savannah, or today when you are trying to do your tax return, your brain really doesn't know much difference. And what happens is that you get all this soup of hormones in your body that cause you to tense up. The cortisol is the most famous one, but there are lots of other ones as well. And when we are alone, when we don't have purpose in life, when we are not surrounded by other people, when we are not involved in our community, when we don't have a spouse, these things have a much stronger effect on us. That we can be in, even loneliness itself is like a chronic activation of this stress axis. So and on the other hand, when you do find purpose in life, when you volunteer, when you do acts of kindness, you can calm these systems down and return more to kind of equilibrium.
Yeah, and it's back to that. It both positive and attenuating the positive. Attenuating the negative, accentuating the positive. So the interacting with other people or volunteering or having purpose in life, is it more that's what drives you to live longer and be healthier, or is it preventing these stressor effects that do shorten life or make you more likely to get sick, or maybe both?
It's all interconnected. Even when we talked about the gut microbes, for example, they are also connected to your social hormones and they are connected to your stress axis. It's all intermixing and affecting one another. And yes, they affect your disease progression or your risk factors for cardiovascular disease, but also can directly affect aging and the telomeres. So it's all acting together in synchrony and to compounding effects and so on. So it's very difficult to just separate one tiny thing and say how much serotonin had an effect on this and that. It's all connected. So yeah, for better or for worse.
Yeah. Well, that's why you have so many different chapters here, all interacting with each other. I love the stuff on personality and emotions. Don't worry, be happy. There's a lot of people that they just can't do that. Some people are born, they're just, by temperament, as we know, probably from behavior genetic studies, that probably half of the variance is accounted for by genes. We know people that are just naturally kind of happy and positive, and others that are not, regardless of how their life outcome is going. And so to what extent can you control those kinds of effects?
Actually, it's much less than 50%. So the genetic factors, the genetic factors in personality are much, in general, lower than that. And yes, they do exist. So there is no denying that there is some kind of genetic factor. But, on the other hand, I often say there is also genetic factor on how good you'll be exercising, for example, right? When I compare myself to my husband, who obviously was born to be exercising, I always fare worse, and I will never run as fast as he does. And that it doesn't mean I don't try running, right? Or I don't try to improve my fitness. I still strive to do that. And it's very similar with personality. The fact that you were born more pessimistic, it doesn't mean that you should, just throw in the towel and say, I'm pessimistic, that's it. You should still try to improve your fitness, let's say, and become more optimistic. And it's absolutely doable. There is a lot of research showing that you can change your personality. Even, we all change our personality as we age, because there is a very clear progression. People tend to become more conscientious, for example, with age. Also, generally more optimistic, less neurotic. So we all change. Also, life events can change us, but also the way you practice, you can, by basically faking it until you make it. So with conscientiousness, for example, if you every day you try to be on time for your meetings, if you just try to clean your desk, you actually will become more conscientious. Just like with exercise, if you every day you force yourself to run this 2, 3, 4, 5 miles, at some point you can run a half marathon or a marathon.
Yeah, I was a late adapter to Strava. I don't know if you know Strava, the app you have on your phone that records your workouts. And then it goes on a board, and you follow other people and you see what they're doing. And now I have a whole network of people that, I see them, exactly what they did, where they rode. I'm a cyclist, so where they rode every day. And the effect has been startling. Because at first I thought, this is so lame. These guys just obsessing over their rides. And then I realized, like half the days I don't feel like riding. And then I'll log into Strava and go, oh, crap, this guy just did that ride. I got to get out there. I'm going to get out there because I don't want this guy to have more miles than me, or I don't want to miss out, because then they ping you with a little, approval, or like way to go or whatever, a little smiley thing. And I realized, wow, I really like that. So it's encouraging to kind of have that. I guess it's a social networking effect that you write about for something like exercise. But back to the big five. So just for people not familiar with this, we're talking about the 5 personality dimensions: ocean, openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, introversion, agreeableness, disagreeableness, and neuroticism, or emotional stability. So as I always understood it from the behavior genetics studies, identical twins raised in separate environments, about 50% of the variance in those big 5 dimensions were accounted for by their genetics. You're telling me that do studies show that's lower than 50%?
I mean, it really depends also on personality dimensions. So some of them are more heritable and some of them are less heritable. At this point, I don't remember the exact numbers for each personality dimension. Also, as you know, studies differ, but some of them are less and some of them are more. But maybe one of them has 50%. Maybe in some study there was 50%, but in general, it's much less than that. And some of them are much easier to change. So, for example, conscientiousness is one of the personality traits that are much easier to change than other ones. Openness to experience, I think, is harder to change, but it's also less important for your health and longevity. Conscientiousness actually is extremely important.
Oh, it is. Why is that? Because it has to do with how disciplined you are in your lifestyle?
So there is part of that. So definitely, the very big part of conscientiousness is that the fact that people who are conscientious are more likely to take their meds on time. They're more likely to show up for annual checkups and eat healthy and go for their bike rides and so on and so on. But even when scientists control for everything they can come up with, every possible thing, there still remains a really large chunk of effect. And in general, they believe that there is some physiological thing going on. We still don't know exactly what. It may be similar to with optimism. Optimism has been more studied than conscientiousness, and it has huge effects on longevity and health as well. But conscientiousness may also have this direct physiological link, maybe something through gene expression. We don't really know, but something is happening out there, even to the point that one researchers with whom I talked told me that if conscientiousness could be made into a pill, something that Ray Kurzweil could swallow, it would be actually the most potent drug on the planet. So it's really important for you. So if you can try to work on conscientiousness, if there was a conscientiousness app, for example, I haven't seen out yet. Maybe there is, but they are definitely not popular. And if they existed, that would be a really amazing thing for health.
Marta, that's your next project. You got to design a conscientious app for your health and longevity and happiness. Well, so that, all those what's called small wins in, kind of motivation studies that, making your bed in the morning, it's a small thing. What difference does it make? Well, if you can make your bed and, then get up and get your workout in and so on and get out the door and off to work or whatever, then when you return, you've got a made bed. And no matter how bad the day goes, you still have one little thing you did that was successful, and you come home to a made bed. Exactly. And that kind of reprograms your brain to do more small wins, and those accumulate over time.
You have to start somewhere. For example, when I was trying to start push-ups, I'm famously horrible with push-ups. So I actually had to start with 2 push-ups. And that was my first achievement, making 2 push-ups. So, so you have to start small, right? I did manage to arrive to 15, but still I started at 2. And the same with conscientiousness. Maybe you'd have to exactly start with making your bed and that's it. But, down the road, you can become a much more conscientious person.
Funny. How many push-ups can you do now?
I don't know, 7.
7, okay. But you can run a half marathon. That's impressive.
I know. Yeah, I don't have muscles in my arms.
What's your time on your half marathon?
Oh, it's nothing to be proud of, but I did finish.
That's right. That's it. That's half the game is showing up and finishing. Yeah. Yeah. Now, when I moved to Santa Barbara 4 years ago, I had to readjust to the time that the local ride starts. The guys I wanted to ride with that I knew, because back down at the Pasadena area, the Tuesday Thursday ride started at 8:30, which is very reasonable. Here they start at 7 in the morning, which means and I always like to ride to the start of the ride because I don't want to drive my car there. That kind of defeats the purpose of doing a workout. So that means I got to roll out about 6:40, which means I need to get up by about 5:30, so that I'm ready to go with all the equipment and have my coffee and so forth. And man, that was hard because I was used to sleeping in. And so now I got to go to bed earlier. And it took me like a year and a half to really kind of make that complete adjustment. And now I'm used to it. Now I can do it and it feels good, and I'm done earlier and all that stuff. And, I made a special deal with the guys here. If I'm late, they leave without me. And so that was especially motivating. So again, those little things, I can see, that you can change that, and why that would make a difference, to the long-term effects there. Meditation, that's kind of made a roaring comeback here. Western Buddhism, Deepak Chopra kind of stuff, or like Sam Harris's more secular maybe type of meditation, but it does seem to be catching on. Tell us a little bit about from your chapter on meditation and what the effects are on health and longevity, or telomeres, or whatever, or not.
As I said before, there's lots of studies on telomeres and meditation. The quality is
questionable.
Not always there, let's say. And generally, if you were to pick up just one thing from my book, from Growing Young, whether you should have purpose in life, or be conscientious, or volunteer, or have a good marriage, or some meditation, wouldn't be it. So it definitely does seem to have some positive effects on our body. People who meditate long term have different activation in their brains. For example, when they are scanning fMRI machines, they can see some differences. They even have different blinking patterns. They breathe differently. But the truth is that in terms of effects on health, they are not as large as the effects of generally being socially included person. So having good connections with friends, community, or having purpose in life. Conscientiousness is much more important than meditation. So of course, if you have plenty of time and you like meditating, it's good for you. But if you don't have time and you are, for example, sacrificing your marriage to meditate, then don't do that, because that's not the way to go.
Yeah, I think another effect might be that you learn to control negative thoughts. This is one of the things Deepak talked to me about when my wife and I went down to his center in Carlsbad, the Chopra Center in Carlsbad. And we did a 3-day retreat with meditation and all that. And I don't like meditation. I've tried it. I just can't do it. I just sit there and go, oh my God, I can't believe how boring this is. I'm one of those, the thought flooding, and I just start thinking about the mortgage payment and where my next bike ride is and whatever. And that appears to be pretty normal. Most people can't. To me, when I go on a long bike ride by myself, let's say, or a long hike with my dog in the mountains, I kind of feel like I'm meditating, like I'm kind of getting away from all the daily stressors and stuff like that. So maybe the effect of meditation is indirect. Maybe meditation is a proxy for something else. Like one of the points Deepak makes is that, the past has already happened. You can't do anything about it. So if you're sitting there just stewing over, that tweet that somebody said or the bad review of your book, and you're just angry and it's generating all those stress hormones, there's nothing magical about meditation positively. It's that it's attenuating all that negative thought flooding that causes stress hormones.
I mean, certainly there is research showing also that meditation can improve your relationships. Exactly. And then if it does improve your relationships, then it can improve your health, right? So it definitely has benefits. I never say it doesn't. It just, sometimes people also put, again, maybe too much confidence in meditation, maybe also because it's something measurable. You can say how many minutes you've meditated today, and we like to measure. But so it is good. It definitely is good. It helps calm the stress systems in your body and helps you be more connected. Maybe can help you also find your purpose in life and so on and so on. So it is good. It just maybe not as good as it's sometimes made to be. The same with gratitude, for example. I found research on gratitude and gratitude journaling generally low quality and not very convincing. I wouldn't say don't do it because it's a nice thing, right? It's definitely it's nice, it's pleasant. If you like it, do it. But don't put all your hopes, health and longevity hopes on gratitude journaling, for example.
But maybe there the effect is that if you're gratitude journaling, you're not obsessing over the thing your boss said or your coworker or the asshole that bumped your car or whatever. And it's attenuating the negative stressors is the effect, not the magic of meditating or journaling or whatever. Maybe it's something like that.
I mean, certainly there is something going on. It's good for you. There is no doubt. It's just not necessarily some kind of magic solution that you just gratitude journal every day for 5 minutes and that's all you need and you're all done and can go on live your life exactly the same way. Basically, again, as with health and aging and all biological processes, it's much more global. You have to look at the big picture and in general how you live your life. It's not that you cannot just keep exactly the same lifestyle, do exactly the same thing and just do 10 minutes of gratitude journals of 10 minutes of meditation and you're fine. It just doesn't work like this. You have to really sit down and think, what I'm doing, what am I doing? How am I living? Am I kind enough? Am I connected enough? Do I have a purpose in my life? So these are really big things that we have to tackle, basically.
I know people who meditate 2 hours a day. How do you find the time to do that? I mean, I would just be bored out of my skull. To me, it almost feels like they're avoiding something. I don't know, but I don't want to be critical of that because if there's a positive effect, fine. The other thing I noticed after being at Deepak's place is the interactive effects, because you're not just doing one thing. When you go to a retreat like that, so you're drinking the green tea and you're getting massages and the food is super great and high quality. And Deepak's center is at this 5-star resort in Carlsbad, California, near the beach. I mean, if you go to a 3-day retreat and you don't feel better after that, you have really serious problems. So it's not the meditation; it's kind of the whole package of stuff that goes with it. And I think that's probably kind of what the bottom line of your book is. There's a whole suite of things we could do, no one of which is going to make the huge difference.
I mean, for writing Growing Young, I also went to a resort like that. It was actually called Longevity Resort in Portugal.
Oh,
and
right,
I do have to admit it was pretty awesome.
Talk about that. Tell us about that trip.
So the whole thing is longevity themed. So there was even like a longevity soap in my bathroom. It was called longevity soap. I have no idea what it did to me. So there was some horrible tasting longevity tea as well in my room. Generally, everything was longevity. And, it was nice. It was really pleasant. It was a beautiful place with a swimming pool and delicious, extremely healthy food, maybe with not enough salt in it for my liking. But you had the spa, you had meditation, you had yoga classes, all the usual stuff. But at the same time, I felt that they really fixated too much on this kind of exactly eating and exercising, this traditional look at what makes us healthy. For example, in the restaurant area, they had these tiny little tables and everybody was sitting by themselves, at least unless somebody was with a friend or something. But a lot of people were just eating completely alone, which from longevity and health perspective, this is actually bad for us because we get the most benefits when we are eating socially. And actually the French people do it really well because, maybe when in France you go to a chambre d'hôte, so the kind of bed and breakfast type of place, when the meals are served, they are always served at a very long communal table when everybody eats together. And I find it really awesome. You really connect, and we need that kind of things. And this eating alone at the longevity resorts, everybody's stuffing their kale, and it was a little disturbing.
That's funny, but you felt better going there.
I mean, it was very pleasurable, but I'm a full-time working mother, so being away for three days at a resort with a pool, that no matter what was going else on, would have been pretty awesome.
And what was your sense of the people that would go to a place like that, spend a lot of money? What are they hoping to get out of it?
I mean, so there were different types of people. There were some people who were staying there just because they wanted to go to Portugal and this place looked nice. There were definitely some very intense people who were really, into their smoothies and detox diets and doing every single possible thing. There was even like some class on crystals and there were also some kind of things like this going on, but yeah, and the longevity soap, so there was a lot of
soap
intensity going on.
That's really funny. Then my friend Leonard Mlodinow and I, the physicist, we went to a Deepak Chopra event at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles. Deepak and Eckhart Tolle were speaking, and it was a pretty interesting experience because there was maybe 3,000 people there. The Shrine Auditorium is pretty huge, each of which paid, I don't know, it was like $200 a ticket or whatever. So, I mean, this was a big money event, but of course, Deepak, he doesn't really need all that. He's fairly successful, as is Eckhart Tolle. But, they're kind of walking around in jeans and T-shirts and tennis shoes, just talking about the purpose and meaning of life. And I'm looking around going, and most of the people there were you could tell they're pulling up in their Teslas and their Lexus, and, they're fairly successful, well-dressed people in Hollywood. Why are they there? Okay, so this gets to kind of the end of your book about the role of purpose and meaning in life. And I got to thinking about, the kind of decline of religion, mainstream religion, Catholicism, Protestant, Baptist, and so on. And the rise of the nuns, the fastest growing religious group of the people that have no religious affiliation. They're not necessarily atheists, but they're just not joining mainstream religions. And a lot of humanists think, well, if, we skeptics, atheists, humanists working against the nefarious actions of religion, maybe we need to replace it with something positive, because do people have a need, if not for religion per se, but something that religion gives, purpose and meaning? And so talk to us a little bit about that.
I mean, so definitely purpose and meaning are huge drivers of health and longevity. And again, with lots of direct effects on your physiology, for example, on your cortisol level. So people have meaning in life, they have healthier cortisol response. They have less inflammation in their body as well. So, and generally they live longer and stay healthier longer. And in Japan, especially, I traveled there to research growing young, and I met a lot of researchers and also elderly people. And they call it the ikigai, which generally translates to purpose in life, although people who speak Japanese say it's very hard to translate, but more or less it's purpose in life, the reason for living. And for them, it's an extremely important part of health and longevity. For example, when I talked with researchers in the West about living long and staying healthy, usually, the conversation went around the diet, exercise, things like that, right? Whereas in Japan, the ikigai, the purpose in life, was one of the very first things that came up. Even the health minister of Japan recognizes ikigai as one of the most important things Japanese people do for their health. And when they do some reports, governmental reports, for example, why the Nagano prefecture right now is the longest living part of Japan. It's no longer Okinawa, by the way. They also discuss ikigai at length. Because the people in Nagano have a lot of ikigai. That's why they probably also live longer. And there is lots of research also in the West showing that this purpose in life really does matter for health and longevity. And what people sometimes ask me as well when I talk about is like, okay, so I love golfing. Can golfing be my ikigai? But this is actually something that's more of a misconception and kind of Western view, because for the Japanese, when they talk about it, it's more about how you contribute to the society, how you give back, how you are connected with others. So, for example, it can be something simple like caring for your grandchildren or keeping your neighborhood pretty by planting flowers. But you have to be giving back somehow. If your golfing means you are keeping the golf course nice for other people, that probably can be ikigai. But just waking up and playing, that's not it.
So it has to do with getting out of yourself and to the.
I mean, yeah, a lot of what I'm writing about is exactly this kind of looking outside of your body, looking outwards instead of inwards, right? When we talk about diet and exercise, it's very kind of like me, kind of really looking at what I ate, how much I exercised. Whereas friendship, community, kindness, volunteering, purpose in life, all these things are kind of stepping outside of yourself and looking at your place on earth and how you are interacting with other people, how are you contributing. So it's a very, very different perspective.
Yeah. So when a Westerner probably would ask, okay, how do I get purpose? I need to get that so I can live longer. What do I do?
I mean, sit down and think about it. That's the thing that most of us are not doing. And it's the simplest solution. And I'm pretty certain that most people, if they do sit down and really take time to just, peacefully in quiet with a pen and a paper or whatever you like, chalk and blackboard, and just sit down and think, what is my purpose in life? What has meaning? What keeps me going? A way that I'm important to others and how my life contributes.
There's not really an answer you could give other than you have to figure it out.
Everybody has to figure it out for themselves. You cannot just give someone, purpose in life. Here you go. This is your purpose in life. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, maybe one of the roles of religions encouraging rituals that have to do with communities and taking care of the poor and things like that is a way of getting you out of yourself and finding purpose in others.
And you have to think, right? It maybe forces you to think about those things, right? Whereas when you are not religious, many people don't have time, so they just don't do that. But maybe going to church forces people to do that.
Right. It's a way of, like, again, making your bed every morning. If you're going to the religious ceremony every week, whatever it is, or you're practicing the Shabbat or doing this on Sunday or that on Saturdays or whatever, it's kind of a behavioral ritual that at least one day a week gets you out of yourself and away from whatever the normal stressors are of work and whatnot. Yeah,
certainly could be that.
Yeah, I just had Joseph Henrik on my podcast yesterday. Actually, we haven't released it yet, but his book is called The Weirdest People in the World. Weird being Western, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic. And, he points out that, 90% of psychology studies are on weird people, not just Westerners, but, like 18 to 22-year-old college students, as if that's what it means to be human.
At leading U.S. universities.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. At Harvard. Okay. And how delimiting that is. But his book is much deeper than that. He really pegs the role of Catholicism first and then Protestantism of kind of restructuring what a normal family is like in hunter-gatherer communities, for example, where polygamy or having a much larger family, an extended family where lots of people help raise the kids and so on. And the church kind of restructured that and said, no, this is a normal family now, a husband and wife and boom, 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 and this is how it's going to be done. And he documents all the edicts that were passed over centuries to kind of gain control over what people were doing in terms of families. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on what
I mean, certainly
on this idea of what is a normal family, or how would you think about that? Because we are pretty westernized in that sense. Hunter-gatherers do have different family structures, and they seem to live healthy, happy lives, without all the trappings of the modern industrial world.
I mean, once again, it's all about being connected. So there are different models possible. There is not one kind of system that necessarily is perfect, as long as you have support of other people, as long as you have other people you can rely on in times of need, that you can confide in, that can help you, and whom you can help as well, to whom you can contribute. So if you have that, it doesn't really matter whether you have one wife or two wives or five husbands, or, it really doesn't matter. As long as this connection is out there. Also, people sometimes ask me, about introverts and extroverts, whether, if you are an introvert, it means you are doomed because you will not have friends. So you're going to die, young. But the thing is also that if we're talking about loners or asocial people, so somebody who just hates others, then unfortunately, yes, you probably will not be as healthy as other people. But most people are obviously not asocial. And even if you're an introvert, you still have connections. You can still have very good friends. And if you have just one really close friend with whom you really feel connected, with whom you can confide and really share your deepest thoughts and feelings, that's fine. You don't have to be the heart of the party, right, surrounded by 200 people, or, like in the room of, like you said, like Deepak Chopra with 3,000 people listening to you. You don't have to do that. But as long as you have those connections, you can meet your neighbors one-on-one. You can meet your friends one-on-one. It really doesn't matter. And whereas another person may need to have that group, and if they don't have it, they will be unhappy. So as long as you are connected in the way that suits you best, but you are, then you will be fine.
Yeah, I remember thinking, I don't have that many really close friends, just a handful of people, in addition to my wife, that I really lean on or I could talk to anything about. And then I think I read a research paper somewhere where that's actually kind of normal. Most people don't have, 150 close friends. Yeah. Dunbar's number, 150 plus or minus.
It's impossible.
Yeah, how could you even maintain that?
But this is what... But exactly, I asked Professor Dunbar that question. How many friends should we have, right? And he said, it's really, it's up to you, but we cannot even have really more than 5 or 7 very close friends. Our brains cannot support that. This 150 number is the kind of so friends, right? So people basically right, and you more or less know what's happening in their lives, but these are not people with whom you hang out every second day, obviously. But on the other hand, when you think about what's happening right now, for example, in the US, a quarter of all Americans don't have a single friend. They don't even have one person in whom they confide. And this is a problem already. So if you don't have a single person with whom you can talk, or who can drive you to the hospital in the middle of the night, or bring you soup when you're sick, then this is a problem. But if you have just one or two, that's all you need, right? There's really, really close friends who will be always there for you.
Give us that number again. 25% of Americans report having no close friends? Yes. That's staggering. That's unbelievable.
Yes, they have reports that is staggering. So it's exactly the same number of Americans who don't know a name of a single neighbor as well, which is, for me, it's also shocking. So of course, it doesn't mean they're exactly the same people. It's just the same number. Yeah. But although probably some of them are exactly the same people. But so yeah, it is very worrisome.
I had a friend that in the 90s worked the Psychic Friends Network. He was a mentalist and a magician, and needed to supplement his income, so he was working the phones to pretend to be a psychic. And so I asked him, who was calling you? He said, mostly just lonely people on the weekends, nights and weekends. They just wanted somebody to talk to, and it's like, oh my God. Right. Unfortunately, that was $3.95 a minute. To talk to somebody is not a good way to do it.
Yeah, but if you are dead lonely, this definitely is bad for your health.
Yeah. That's the take home message really from your book, I think, to live to whatever the number is, doesn't really matter. To live a long, healthy, happy life, the best thing you can do is have friends and family and people that care about you and that you care about.
And look outside of yourself, like contribute to others, to your community, to basically step outside of yourself.
Right. So you're a mother. How old's you have a daughter, right? A young daughter. So when she's,
Yes.
said, back to where we started, when she's 80 and you're 100 and whatever, then
a lot, 100 and a
lot. Actually, yeah, having children, I would think, it certainly takes you out of yourself. It did when, I have a 29-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son now, and it definitely changed the way I think about myself. I just think about myself less, and so I would think having children is good for longevity. Although maybe there's a counter effect for the amount of stress.
Yeah. Yes. So actually, I tried to tackle the topic of children, and I even thought about including it in Growing Young, but then I realized I would have to have a whole chapter explaining all the counteracting effects, because as you said, on one hand, you do step out of yourself. It gives you purpose and meaning and a lot of happiness and connection and all these things. But on the other hand, the stress and also purely physiological effects on mothers, for example, or also the lack of sleep. So there's just so much going on, the financial problems for a lot of people. So it's just is a mess. It's very complicated, and it would require probably a standalone second book on top of it. So I decided not to even try to address it in Growing Young.
Maybe Growing Young is the gift to your child that this is how best for you to get to be 100, based on the current research. Of course, we don't know 20 years from now. Maybe some of this will be not supported or not replicated or whatever. But I can't imagine the social effects you write about changing much. It's so obvious that we're a social primate species that need other people. That seems to be pretty solid.
And as I've said, this data has been already out there in the 60s and 70s. Of course, we have much more research these days, but it's not that new. And in a way, a lot of research doesn't change. When you think, for example, about research on the health effects of vegetables and fruits, maybe we know some more nuanced things these days, but in general, it's the same message that we've had for decades. There is nothing new in there. Exercise as well, the most basic things in their simplest pure core are exactly the same. Eat lots of vegetables, don't eat sugar and junk food, exercise, be connected. This message hasn't changed for a very long time. So a lot of research on top of it is a little bit spurious sometimes. So I really don't believe that this message will change that much in 20 years.
I just remembered I wanted to plug your previous book, Meat Hooked, which I also read. I really loved. And I love that cover because it makes me hungry. That nice lamb chop there. The history and science of our 2.5 million year obsession.
I can show you the Polish cover.
Let me see the Polish cover. Yeah.
I will show. I love the Polish one. I'll show you. I think it's extremely creative. It's like that.
Yeah. Same thing. Lamb chops, but not cooked yet.
So
it's really funny. Yeah. So after you wrote that book, and then,
although I heard from some vegetarians that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it was it. So I actually heard from some vegetarians that they found the cover too repulsive. So
they wouldn't even pick it up
because it was too meaty.
That's that kind of contamination, that sort of magical thinking of contamination. Just touching a picture of it could contaminate your body. How did your diet change after you wrote that book? Are you a vegetarian now?
So I generally am a vegetarian, although sometimes I fail. So I sometimes eat fish. I even sometimes eat tiny amounts of meat, especially, for example, if my meat-eating daughter leaves a piece of pizza with pepperoni on it. I do admit I eat it before I will eat it. So, so I'm not very vegetarian. I'm trying to eat more vegan as well. It's complicated, but I generally, I'm trying my best, but it's not. I'm not 100% anything.
I'm a reducitarian. I actually joined that group, the reducitarians.
Yes, exactly.
And in a way, it makes me feel better because then you don't have the guilt thing, where you have 100%, zero tolerance standard, and then you violate it, then you feel like crap for doing that. As opposed to the reducitarians, like I'm going to try not to eat so much meat. But then I read these other studies and books that meat's okay, and Joe Rogan's had all these people on the podcast, vegetarian athletes, vegetarian Navy SEALs, meat-eating athletes, and so on, and it goes back and forth. And I often feel like I'm in the middle of one of these replication crises, and I don't know which studies are the flawed ones and which ones are the good ones.
I mean, with meat, I think story is much simpler. In general, just follow the money. So if you see a study showing that you should eat more protein, for example, because it's good for your sleep or for anything else, the first thing I do when I see a study like this, I scroll down to check where the money came from. And basically, I have to tell you, I still haven't seen a single study that would say that you have to eat more protein and animal protein to stay healthy that has not been in some way sponsored by the meat industry. I haven't seen it. If you find one, then send it to me, but I really haven't seen one. And sometimes the links are not shown in the actual paper. You have to dig deeper. But if you check the names and where the grants are coming from, and sometimes the grant givers have very tidy sounding names, that's like Swedish Nutrition Foundation, for example, which sounds very, not meat industry, but when you look who gives money to the Swedish Nutrition Foundation, it's all the meat producers. So in general, it's very simple. And on the other hand, also sometimes people ask me, so what about the vegetarian industry? And the funny thing is, even the name sounds weird because the truth is the vegetarian industry just doesn't have anywhere close to the money that the meat industry has, and it's nowhere close as consolidated. So when you think about the meat industry, their sales per year are worth in the U.S. alone more or less the same amount as the GDP of Hungary or Ukraine. And on the other hand, all the vegetarian meat substitutes have about 200 times less of sales per year, and they are completely, there are so many tiny little companies out there, whereas for example in beef, almost 75% of the market belongs, is in the hands of just 4 companies. So they have much more power to skew the research, and they sponsor a lot, and then they make sure that the sponsored studies make it out there to the journalists. I get the PR, publicity emails myself, and yeah, so generally it's quite simple, and most of those studies are just. I mean, you can argue that sponsoring doesn't mean that the results will be in favor, but there is other research on the pharmaceutical industry, for example, showing that it tends to be more favorable to the whoever gave the money.
Interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I think you're probably right on that. So probably reducing the amount is good. I love the story in there. I'd forgotten about that Oprah got sued by the meat industry, but the meat lobbyists. And there's no vegetable lobbyists, except for, I guess, probably corn.
I mean, but corn mostly goes to meat industry. Actually, the vast majority of American corn is not eaten by humans. Just like with soy, it's eaten actually by animals. And when I was writing Meat Hooked, at some point during the editing process, I had to sit down with a lawyer from my publishing house, Basic Books, and he went with a red pen all over my book. Marking passages that had to be changed so that I wouldn't offend meat. And this is actually a real legal problem, offending meat, for which you can get sued. Difficult to pronounce for me, sued. So and I had to change them to make it, just so I wouldn't end up like Oprah, basically. And when I was writing Growing Young, I didn't have to sit down with any lawyer. I wasn't offending any friendship lobby or anything like that. But the meat lobby is very real and prone to suing people.
Funny. Yeah, very, very disturbing. Well, Marta, we've been going we'll be going an hour and a half. I know you have other interviews you got to do because your book just came out, and I love your writing. I love your research and your attention to detail. What's next on your agenda?
So I'm already writing the third one, and I'm probably not allowed to say what it's about. It's connected to climate change, but more in the optimistic way, a little bit similar in spirit to Growing Young, but about climate change.
Oh, good. Well, we need a positive spin on that because it's gotten it's gotten so politicized. So that would be good.
I mean, I need a positive spin really because when I see what's happening out there, it's I need it for myself.
Yeah. So, well, thanks for coming on the show and appreciate your time and all your writing and work. It's great. Love your books.